Joseph Carter leaned against the counter of his small convenience store, rubbing his temples as he stared at the ledger. The numbers didn't lie. He was barely breaking even. Cedar Hollow, once a bustling small town, had suffered blow after blow in recent years. Factories had shut down, families had moved away, and those who stayed were struggling just as much as Joseph. The store had been in his family for 3 generations. Joseph had grown up stacking shelves here, learning the value of hard work from his parents. But these days, hard work didn't seem to be enough. He had taken out loans to keep the lights on, but his savings were gone, and his creditors were calling daily. The thought of closing the shop kept him awake at night. As he flipped the open sign to closed, the jingling of the doorbell startled him. A man stepped in, wearing a tattered coat that looked like it had seen too many winters. His face was thin, his eyes hollow, and he held his hat in his hands as though ashamed to be there. "Excuse me," the man said hesitantly, "but I haven't eaten in 2 days. I don't have any money, but if you have something to spare, anything, I'd be grateful." Joseph's first instinct was to say no. He had been turning down credit requests from loyal customers for months, knowing he couldn't afford to give anything away. But as he looked at the man, something stirred inside him. A memory of his mother handing out bread to a family in need when he was a child. Without a word, Joseph grabbed a loaf of bread from the shelf, a small bag of apples, and a carton of milk. He placed them in a bag and handed them to the man. The stranger's eyes filled with tears. "I don't know how to thank you," he said, clutching the bag to his chest. "You won't regret this, sir. I promise." Joseph nodded, trying to ignore the pang of worry about his dwindling stock. "Just take care of yourself," he replied. As the man left, Joseph locked the door and turned off the lights. The shop felt emptier than ever. But as he closed the register for the night, he realized something strange. He didn't regret helping the man. In fact, it was the first time in weeks he felt like he had done something that truly mattered. That night, Joseph dreamed of the stranger's words. "You won't regret this." The early rays of sunlight streamed through the shop's dusty windows as Joseph unlocked the front door the next morning. He still felt a lingering unease from the night before. What if more people like the stranger came, expecting him to hand out free food? He wasn't sure his struggling business could handle it. As he stepped outside to sweep the sidewalk, his broom froze mid-air. Lined up neatly in front of the shop were 3 wicker baskets, brimming with fresh produce, jars of honey, and wrapped loaves of homemade bread. A folded note sat atop one of the baskets, held down by a small stone. Joseph bent down to pick it up, his heart racing with curiosity. The note was written in elegant handwriting. "To the man who shows kindness in the face of hardship, thank you for reminding us what it means to be human. A grateful stranger." His eyes scanned the street, hoping to catch a glimpse of the mysterious stranger from the night before. Instead, he saw something even more surprising. A small group of townspeople had gathered across the street, murmuring and pointing toward the baskets. "What's going on, Joseph?" asked Linda, a local florist, as she approached with her apron still dusted in soil. I'm not sure," Joseph admitted, holding up the note. "These were just left here this morning." The murmurs grew louder as more people joined, curious about the baskets and the story behind them. Soon, Joseph found himself surrounded by a small crowd, each person speculating about the anonymous gesture. "It must have been someone who knows how much you've done for this town," said an elderly man named Frank, who had been shopping at Joseph's store since it opened. "I haven't done anything special," Joseph replied, feeling a little embarrassed by the attention. But the truth was undeniable. News of his kindness toward the hungry stranger had somehow spread, and the townspeople seemed to admire him for it. Linda offered to help bring the baskets inside, and others followed, offering their own small contributions. A jar of homemade jam, a carton of eggs, even a few cans of soup. By midday, Joseph's counter was piled high with donated goods. He looked around his store, overwhelmed by the generosity of his neighbors. For months, he had felt isolated in his struggles, believing he was carrying his burdens alone. But now, the atmosphere felt different. Among the crowd, a local journalist named Peter approached Joseph with a notebook in hand. "Joseph, do you mind if I write about this? People need to hear stories like this, especially now." Joseph hesitated. He didn't want to come across as someone looking for praise or attention, but something about the moment felt bigger than himself. He nodded slowly, saying, "If it helps others see the power of kindness, then sure." As the crowd dispersed, Joseph stood in the doorway of his store, watching the townspeople go about their day. For the first time in a long while, he felt a spark of hope. He couldn't shake the feeling that the stranger's visit had set something extraordinary in motion. The buzz in town about Joseph's mysterious baskets had only grown. Over the next few days, more people stopped by his shop, some with offerings and others simply to share their thoughts. Joseph noticed something unusual. Customers who used to visit occasionally now came more often, their warm smiles and supportive words lifting his spirits. However, one question remained unanswered. Who was the stranger, and why had he left the baskets? Late one evening, as Joseph was closing up, he heard a soft knock on the door. Startled, he turned to see a shadowy figure standing outside. His pulse quickened. Could it be the same stranger? He opened the door cautiously, and in stepped an older man wearing a faded trench coat and a weary expression. The man looked vaguely familiar, though Joseph couldn't place him at first. "Evening," the man said, his voice low but steady. "I hear you've been wondering about those baskets." Joseph nodded, his curiosity piqued. "Do you know who left them?" The man offered a faint smile and pulled up a chair near the counter. "I think it's time you knew the whole story." He introduced himself as Henry, a man who had lived in the town many years ago but had since moved away. Life had taken a difficult turn for him, leaving him homeless and struggling to make ends meet. The previous week, while passing through town, he had stopped by Joseph's shop on a whim, driven by desperation and hunger. "I didn't expect kindness, not after the way people have looked at me these past years," Henry admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "But you didn't hesitate. You saw me as a person, not just as a burden." Joseph listened, stunned. He hadn't thought much of the incident, only that it was the right thing to do. "I wanted to repay you," Henry continued, "but I didn't have much. So I reached out to some folks who owe me favors, friends, farmers, even a baker I once helped fix his roof. They all pitched in to fill those baskets." Joseph's eyes widened. "You did all that? Just because I gave you a loaf of bread?" Henry nodded. "It wasn't about the bread. It was about being seen, about someone reminding me that I still mattered." Joseph felt a lump in his throat. He had been so consumed by his own struggles that he hadn't realized the ripple effect of his small gesture. Before Henry left, he handed Joseph another note. "This one isn't from me," he said cryptically. "Read it after I'm gone." As Henry disappeared into the night, Joseph unfolded the note. It was signed by the baker, the farmers, and others who had contributed to the baskets. "Thank you for inspiring us to believe in kindness again." Joseph sat in silence, the weight of the moment sinking in. He had given one loaf of bread, but the act had grown into something far greater than he could have imagined. News of the stranger's story and Joseph's kindness spread like wildfire across the small town. The note Henry had delivered wasn't just a thank you. It became a symbol of how one small act of generosity could inspire others. Soon, customers who had previously passed Joseph's shop without a second thought began dropping by with purpose. One morning, as Joseph prepared to open the store, he noticed a small crowd gathered outside. A mix of familiar and unfamiliar faces greeted him warmly, holding baskets, envelopes, and small gifts. "We heard about what you did," said Mrs. Carter, an elderly widow who lived down the street. She handed Joseph a hand-knitted scarf. "I can't do much, but I wanted to show my gratitude. You reminded me that kindness still exists." Behind her, a group of local farmers stepped forward. "We'd like to supply your shop with fresh produce every week, for free," one of them said, tipping his hat. "It's our way of supporting the good you're doing." Joseph was overwhelmed. "I don't understand," he said, his voice trembling. "I only gave someone bread. I don't deserve all this." A young teacher spoke up. "You gave more than bread, Mr. Clark. You gave hope, something this town has been missing for a long time." From that day onward, Joseph's shop became a hub of generosity. Customers started donating money to a small fund he kept at the counter, labeled "For Those in Need." Every time someone came in with a heavy heart or an empty wallet, Joseph knew he had the means to help them without hesitation. Local business owners also began pitching in. The cafe across the street offered to provide free meals for struggling families, inspired by Joseph's example. The bookstore next door started a program to donate books to children who couldn't afford them. Joseph's shop, once struggling to stay afloat, became the heart of a thriving network of goodwill. But not everyone welcomed the change. Some skeptics in town dismissed the efforts as a fleeting trend. "It won't last," one man muttered at the cafe. "People are only helping because it makes them feel good about themselves." Joseph overheard the comment and couldn't help but feel a pang of doubt. Would this newfound generosity truly endure? Was it sustainable or just a temporary spark? His doubts were put to rest the following week when the mayor himself visited the shop. "Joseph," he began, placing a hand on his shoulder, "I've been watching what's happening here, and I think it's remarkable. This town hasn't felt this united in decades." The mayor proposed an idea, a town-wide initiative to help those in need, modeled after Joseph's example. "We'll call it the Bread Basket Program," he said. "Every business, every family can contribute however they can, money, food, services, and it all started with you." As the community rallied around the program, Joseph felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He hadn't just helped one man, he had reignited a sense of humanity in an entire town. One brisk morning, weeks after the Bread Basket program had launched, Joseph arrived at his shop early to prepare for the day. As he unlocked the door, he noticed a figure standing in the shadow of the alley beside his store. His heart skipped. Was it Henry? Joseph approached cautiously, but as he drew closer, the figure stepped into the light. It wasn't Henry, but a young boy, no older than 10, clutching a tattered envelope and looking nervously at the ground. "Can I help you, son?" Joseph asked gently. The boy hesitated before handing over the envelope. "He said to give you this," he whispered before darting away into the streets. Joseph stood there, puzzled, before tearing open the envelope. Inside was a single folded piece of paper, with handwriting he instantly recognized. It was from Henry. "Dear Joseph, I've been watching what's happening in your town. I cannot thank you enough for what you've done, not just for me, but for everyone. You've turned a simple gesture into a movement that's helping countless people. What you don't know is that your kindness has already changed my life more than you could imagine. I wasn't always the man you met that night. Years ago, I owned a bakery in another town. My wife and I ran it together, but after her passing, I couldn't manage the grief, and I let it all fall apart. I left, ashamed and broken, wandering aimlessly. When you gave me that loaf of bread, it reminded me of what it meant to care, to connect with people again. It gave me the strength to start over. With your generosity, I've managed to rebuild my life. I found work and a roof over my head, and for the first time in years, I feel hopeful again. The young boy who gave you this letter is my nephew. He's been helping me bake bread again, just like I used to. Joseph, your shop didn't just feed me. It saved me. And now I want to pay it forward. Attached, you'll find the deed to the bakery my wife and I owned. I can't think of a better person to take it over than you. Use it however you see fit, to grow your business, to help more people, or simply as a place where kindness can flourish. Forever grateful, Henry. Joseph's hands trembled as he held the deed. The bakery was in the next town over, fully paid off. He leaned against the shop door, overwhelmed by emotion. Later that day, as the townspeople gathered for the weekly breadbasket meeting, Joseph shared the letter with them. Gasps filled the room, followed by applause and cheers. The bakery became a symbol of their collective generosity. Joseph decided to run it as a community space where anyone could come for a meal, a warm drink, or simply a kind word. As he hung a sign above the bakery's door, he smiled. It read, "The Breadbasket, where kindness is always on the menu."